So here I am showing you the consistency. This is thick, right? It's got a stiff peak, and that's definitely what you want for the popcorn. So I put my bag down into a cup, and this is that thick icing with the stiff peak. You want it stiff because you don't want it, you want there to be a lot of definition in this cookie. So I put this in the bag, and then I'm going to tie that off. And I've done the same thing with white. This is white thick icing. I'm going to push the icing down into the bottom of the bag. And then I'm going to actually cut the ends, pretty large. Because I'm going to put these two icing bags together into another bag. That's what creates that cute, multicolor effect. So here I'm taking a larger bag, putting these two smaller bags down in it side by side. And I want them to be even, kind of even. If they're not even, it's okay. You can just squeeze out the icing until both colors start to come through. So I'm kind of just working it to where both tips are down in the bag. Then I've cut the bag, the bottom of the bag. And isn't that a fun effect? I'm just squeezing it out onto the cookie in blobs, basically, because you got to think about what popcorn looks like. And that's kind of what it looks like, right? Just blobs. But the reason you want to make sure that your icing is really thick is you want those big blobs to stay that way. If this all smoothed out, it would not look like popcorn. So is that the easiest thing ever? Now you could totally leave it like this, but I'm taking a paintbrush and some cornstarch, and I'm just doing little indentions in my blobs. Because if you look at a kernel of popcorn, they do have a darker center, and you can do that with a marker. So this is just the Tweets marker, and I have this on your supply list, and I'm just creating that darker brown on the inside to make it look more like popcorn. Now, let's basically do the exact same thing, only let's make some little popcorn royal icing transfers. I've just taken my transfer sheet and my bag of double color, the white and the yellow, and I'm just making little kernels of popcorn. It's so much fun to do this, and you can decorate your cookies in so many fun ways using these little transfers. Now you'll notice, dependent on how I hold my bag, either more white will come out or more yellow. So you can kind of rotate the bag in your hand as you're doing this, and you'll have different colors. Next, I'm doing the exact same thing with the cornstarch. Again, you wouldn't have to do that, but I do think it makes it, look a little bit more like popcorn. The first thing that we're going to do for the popcorn box is take your white piping icing. You're just going to go around the bottom where the actual popcorn box is going to be. And you'll notice this is not perfect. I came in a little bit on one side of the cookie. Cookies are cookies. They're meant to be eaten. They don't have to be perfect. Sometimes I have to remind myself of that. But I'm going around with my piping icing. Next, I'm going to take my flood icing. I'm going to apply pressure to the bag so that it comes out really well. I like to go around the outside edge of the piping line first, or the cookie, and then I'm just filling it in. And you want to make sure that you get it really good and full of icing. Otherwise, you're not going to have that really good smooth finish. Next, I'm going to take my scribe and I'm just going to wiggle it around. Now, I do have a little overflow on this one side, so you're going to notice I'm going to hold the scribe up and down and just run it along the edge, and that gets off that excess. Now, I'm going to let my cookie completely dry, and here is my stencil holder. First, I put down the bottom, then the stencil, then the screen genie, then the top of the stencil holder. Using a screen genie helps so much with creating crisp lines when you are airbrushing. So I just set it on top of the cookie. You want to make sure again that it is completely dry. Then I'm going to take my red airbrush color and I'm just going to do light passes first and then go back over. But again, the screen genie helps so much. Now, you'll notice my cookie wasn't completely dry, and so some of it peeled up, but it's okay because that's going to be completely covered. Next, I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did with the small popcorn cookie, and I'm just going to create those blobs that are going to be the popcorn. You also want to put some blobs on top, do a second layer once your bottom layer is a little bit dry. Although with this thick icing, you really don't have to let it dry. You can go ahead and do it. If it's not thick enough, that 3D effect of the icing on top of the first layer of icing won't work too well. They'll just kind of all blend together. So make sure that you have really thick icing. Next, I'm just creating those little divots. Also, I notice that day-old icing or 2-day-old icing doesn't work quite as well for these real dimensional cookies. You really want to use fresh icing when you do this. It tends to hold its shape better. So make icing to do this the same day that you're going to decorate the cookie. And again, make sure that it's really good and thick. And then you will have super cute cookies. Now, again, I'm using the brush tip from Tweet's Cookie Connection. And it's the brown color. I'm going to put it on the supply list. And you're just going to create the centers. Make them a little bit brown. I think it makes it look more like popcorn. Now I'm going to use one of those little royal icing transfers that we made earlier to act like there's popcorn that has fallen out of the bag. And I'm just going to affix this to the bottom of my cookie using a little bit of royal icing. Now you can also use these transfers to add a little bit more dimension at the top and add 1 or 2 transfers of popcorn at the top of your box. Now let's do our soda. Now I thought I was putting my video on, but apparently I turned it off and I did not videotape the bottom part of this, but I just outlined it with red and then filled it in with red flood, let it dry completely. Then I'm going to do the top, and I just outline that using my white piping icing, and I'm filling it in with the white flood. Now I'm going to let this white crust over, and then I'm going to do a wet on wet design on the top of the straw. So I'm taking my piping icing, I went around the edge and then created that little squiggle, and then I'm filling it in with my flood icing. And then I'm going to take my red piping icing. I'm using piping instead of flood because I want the stripes to be a little smaller. And I'm just doing this while the white icing is still wet. And that creates my striped straw at the top of my soda cup.